It started with a ring and a date, two things that once meant love, but ended up defining betrayal. The day my sister announced her engagement, she wore my smile, my venue, and even my photographer. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. Mom clapped like it was the proudest moment of her life, as if Olivia had just cured cancer instead of stealing my wedding. The air in that restaurant felt too thick to breathe, filled with congratulations and lies wrapped in champagne bubbles. I watched her flash her diamond, my diamond, and say, "He chose right this time." The room roared with laughter. I just smiled, the kind of smile that keeps your teeth together so no one hears your heart cracking. That night, I deleted every wedding email, every folder, every picture of the dress I once loved. Then I turned off my phone, sat in the dark, and whispered to myself, "She can have the fairy tale, but I'll keep the truth." It had all started 6 months earlier, when everything still made sense. I was engaged to Daniel, the man I thought I'd grow old with. We'd been planning our wedding at Magnolia Harbor, a small waterfront venue in Charleston, where the sunset painted the river gold every evening. I fell in love with the place before I fell in love with him, maybe because it felt calm, simple. My sister Olivia called it boring. She was the kind of woman who wanted fireworks, attention, and audience. I wanted quiet vows under the sky. When I told Mom about our plans, she smiled politely, then said, "You know your sister's always dreamed of a big wedding too. Maybe don't take the only summer slot she's had her eye on." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But Olivia's wedding was just a fantasy back then. She wasn't even dating anyone serious. Still, Mom had a way of turning her wishes into warnings. Olivia and I were never close, but we weren't enemies either. Growing up, she was the golden child, loud, adored, perfect under pressure. I was the quiet one, the planner, the fixer. She used to tease me for being too serious, calling me Miss Spreadsheet. I used to think it was affectionate. Now I'm not so sure. 3 months before my wedding, Daniel's company sent him on a project overseas. He left for 2 weeks, then 3. Our calls grew shorter. I tried not to overthink it. Olivia visited, often saying she wanted to help me with wedding details. She came to every vendor meeting, smiling sweetly, complimenting my taste. Sometimes she'd make small jokes. "Are you sure that color suits you? It's a little plain." I shrugged it off, thinking that's just how sisters are. Then one evening, she texted me a photo of Magnolia Harbor. The caption read, "This place really is stunning in person." I frowned, confused. "Why was she there without me?" I called her. She answered, laughter in her voice. "Relax, Ratch. I was just checking out the place for you. I happened to be nearby." Something inside me twisted. My deposit was already paid, contract signed. Still, she sounded too comfortable, too familiar with the staff. When I arrived the next week for a meeting, the venue manager looked nervous. "Miss Moore," he said carefully, "we've received some conflicting communication about the event date." "Are you moving your wedding?" I stared at him. "What?" "No, why would I?" He looked down. "Your sister called. She said you offered her your booking. She even sent a follow-up confirming it." The room spun. I pulled up my email, and there it was, an email that looked like it came from me with my signature sent from a fake account. My sister had copied every detail of my booking and transferred it under her name. I remember laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laugh people write about in happy endings. It was hollow, sharp, the kind that makes people step back. "Can you forward me that email?" I asked. The manager hesitated. "Please," I repeated, quieter this time. He did. I forwarded it to Olivia. No message, no greeting. She replied 2 hours later. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a venue. You can find another one." I drove straight to Mom's house. She was in the kitchen humming, setting the table for dinner. "You knew," I said before she even turned around. She sighed, still stirring the soup. Sweetheart, Olivia was heartbroken when she found out her dream date was taken. "You have to understand, she's always wanted that summer slot, and you're more flexible. My voice cracked. It was my wedding. Mom put the spoon down, finally looking at me. "She's your sister. Family comes first. You can move your plans. Be gracious. I stood there, staring at her, realizing grace was just another word for silence in this house. That night, Daniel called from Singapore. I told him everything. He went quiet, then said, "Let's not make this bigger than it is, okay?" That was the moment I knew I was alone. A week later, Olivia posted her engagement announcement. She was marrying Mark, Daniel's co-worker. They'd apparently fallen in love fast. The picture showed them laughing under the same oak tree where Daniel and I had taken our engagement photos. My stomach turned as I read the caption, "He chose the right sister." The comments flooded in hearts, claps, laughter. Mom commented too, "So proud of you both. True love always finds its way." I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I just sat on the couch, scrolling through their photos, watching as the life I'd built quietly transferred to someone else's hands. By morning, I had deleted Daniel's number. I called the florist, the caterer, the planner, told them to cancel everything. I didn't even ask for refunds. What I didn't cancel, though, was the photographer. Lucas had been my choice long before Olivia ever thought about a wedding. He called me when he heard about the change, his voice hesitant. "You okay?" "Sure," I said. "But keep every file, every email. Don't delete anything." He paused. "Rachel, what are you planning?" I smiled, the kind of smile you practice when you finally stop bleeding. "Nothing yet." That was the first night I slept soundly in months. Not because I'd moved on, but because I'd stopped running. And somewhere in that quiet between heartbreak and hatred, something small and sharp began to form, something that looked a lot like peace but wasn't. Not yet. The first time I saw Olivia and Mark together after their announcement, it was at Mom's house on a Sunday evening. The same dining room we'd grown up in, the same table where Dad used to make us say what we were grateful for, now felt like a stage. Olivia was glowing, performing gratitude like it was theater. Mom had cooked her favorite meal, not mine, and kept calling her the bride to be like I wasn't sitting right there. When I walked in, Olivia stood to hug me, camera ready. "Rach, you made it," she said, too loud, too bright. Her arms wrapped around me but never touched. Her perfume smelled like my old wedding bouquet. "I've been dying to talk details. We're so close to finalizing everything." Mom smiled, pushing a plate toward me. "Your sister's been working so hard. You should see the venue now, it's beautiful." I said. Olivia paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh right. You were there first." Mark laughed. "What are the odds, huh?" I stared at my plate, cutting into food I couldn't taste. My family had mastered the art of pretending that betrayal was normal. Mom kept pouring wine, pretending it was peace. So Olivia continued, her voice sugar slick. "You're still doing photography, right? I might need some advice for my engagement shoot. We want something natural but elevated." "Maybe Lucas can help you," I said. "He's good at making fake things look real." Mom shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Rachel." What? I smiled. "It's a compliment." The silence that followed was familiar, the kind that fills every room where truth has to whisper. Olivia leaned back, swirling her wine. "You know, I was thinking, you could still come to the wedding. You'll love what I've done with the place. I made a few upgrades, brighter lighting, more flowers. It'll feel less muted." Muted. That was her word for me. Quiet. Controlled. Dull. I put my fork down. "You're right," I said softly. "It'll be unforgettable." She grinned, thinking I'd surrendered. She always mistook stillness for weakness. After dinner, I helped Mom clean up while Olivia and Mark left for a venue check. Mom moved slowly, her voice low. "You shouldn't provoke her. Provoke her. She stole my life. She didn't steal it, Rachel. She just wanted it too." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You say that like there was enough to share." Mom's face hardened. "You've always been so dramatic. Can't you let things go? Family fights are temporary. Blood is forever." I wiped my hands and turned to her. "Blood is what stains, Mom, not what heals." That was the last thing I said before walking out. Outside, the air smelled like rain and old jasmine. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, my fingers shaking. Through the windshield, I could still see Mom's kitchen window glowing warm. Inside that light, my family laughed without me. The next few weeks were a blur of rumors and rehearsals I wasn't invited to. Charleston felt smaller, crueler. People in town whispered about the sisters' wedding swap, pretending not to take sides, but always glancing my way with quiet pity. I hated pity more than betrayal. It meant they'd already decided I'd lost. One afternoon, Tara showed up at my studio with 2 coffees, and that look she always wore when she thought I was close to breaking. "You look like someone who hasn't screamed in weeks," she said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "I've been busy not existing," I said. She handed me the coffee. "So, you gonna tell me what's next, or do I have to read it on Reddit like everyone else in Charleston apparently does?" I laughed, for real this time. "What's next is nothing. I'm done fighting ghosts." "Bullshit, Tara." "No," she said, leaning forward. "You're not done. You're just quiet. And when you get quiet, bad things start forming behind your eyes." I didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. Later that night, I drove to Magnolia Harbor. The gate was open, the string lights glowing faintly. Olivia had a fitting scheduled there the next morning, but I knew the staff still recognized me. I walked in through the side path that led to the pier, the one I'd planned to walk down in my dress. The smell of the river was sharp and salty the way I remembered. Inside the main hall, new decorations were stacked against the wall. Gold arches, velvet runners, silver-rimmed glasses. It all looked expensive and cold. I stood there for a long minute trying to remember what it had looked like when it was mine, soft, candlelit, warm. Footsteps echoed behind me. Lucas appeared holding a light meter and a clipboard. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Rachel, you shouldn't be here." "I could say the same to you," I said. He looked uneasy. "It's just work. I didn't know they'd rehire me until yesterday." "Of course they did," I said. "She doesn't build, she borrows." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You know I still have all your files. Every photo, every note, even the original contract. She never replaced your name." That caught my breath. "What do you mean?" "The booking's technically still under Rachel Moore. She just told the planner she'd taken over the event. They didn't update the legal paperwork." I stared at him, the air between us buzzing with quiet electricity. "So legally the wedding's still mine." Lucas shrugged. "On paper, yeah." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that email, the fake one she sent in my name, and Mom's face when she told me to be gracious. The word echoed like a curse. The next morning, I drove to the cafe by the harbor and opened my laptop. I pulled up every vendor contract I'd signed: venue, catering, florist, photography. All of them still listed Rachel Moore as the client. I opened a blank document and began making notes, one line for each venue, still under my name. Photographer still mine. Deposit 70% paid by my card. Date unchanged. Tara called while I typed. "You sound busy." "Planning something inventory," I said. "Inventory of what power?" There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. "Oh damn, that tone." "I know that tone. It's just paperwork," I said, though my hands were trembling slightly. By afternoon, I'd drafted emails to every vendor, polite, professional, emotionless. Just confirming details, payment status, and contract names. Within hours, replies came back, all the same, still mine. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel angry either, just aware. That evening, Mom called again. "Your sister's upset," she said. "She says vendors are contacting you." "They're not contacting me," I said. "I'm contacting them." "Why?" "Because it's still my wedding." Rachel, Mom sighed. "Don't do this. You'll embarrass yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I think she's done enough of that for both of us." There was silence on the line. Real silence this time, not the kind you fill with denial. After the call, I sat by the window watching rain slide down the glass. Charleston thunder rolled far away, the kind that feels like warning. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page: silence is strategy. For the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel broken. I felt deliberate. Outside, the sky cracked open with lightning, and for a moment the reflection in the window looked like two versions of me, one standing in the light, one hidden in shadow. And I couldn't help but think maybe both of them were necessary. A week later, the first cracks started to show. Olivia called me in the middle of a shoot, her voice sugar-coated but tight. "Hey Rach. Weird question, did you talk to the florist?" I wiped sweat from my forehead, balancing the camera strap on my shoulder. "Why?" "Because they said the order was cancelled. Apparently you asked for a refund." I kept my tone flat. "That's odd. The contract's still under my name. Maybe they just made a mistake." She exhaled sharply. "Rachel, don't play games. My wedding is in 6 weeks. I don't have time for this." "Then maybe confirm who's actually paying for it," I said and hung up. It took her less than 10 minutes to text Mom. Within an hour, Mom called me. Of course she did. "Rachel," she began. "What on earth are you doing checking my accounts?" I said. "Apparently I've been financing someone else's big day." Her tone hardened. "Olivia says you're trying to sabotage her wedding." I laughed quietly. "That's funny. She already sabotaged mine." Mom didn't appreciate irony. "You're acting out of spite. That's not who you are. Maybe you don't know who I am anymore." She sighed. "Rachel, please. Be the bigger person." I already was. That's why I got stepped on. The line went dead after that. By evening, my inbox was full of polite confusion vendors confirming canceled deposits, refunded payments, voided orders. I sat at my desk, each message a quiet clap of justice. I didn't yell. I didn't post. I just watched the balance of power shift back to where it belonged. Lucas stopped by later with takeout and a small smirk. "You really canceled the florist." "Just testing the system," I said. "Turns out silence carries authority." He sat across from me, opening a box of noodles. "You know I've worked with all kinds of brides, but your sister, she's a performance artist. Every shot is a show." I looked up. "You've been filming her mostly behind-the-scenes stuff. She wants a cinematic wedding video." He hesitated. "You sure you want me involved in this?" "Yes," I said. "And I want you to keep everything. Every clip, every audio file, especially her voice." He frowned. "That's oddly specific." "Think of it as insurance," I said. He leaned back, studying me. "You're planning something." I smiled faintly. "I'm just preparing for the lighting to change." When he left, I opened my journal. I'd been writing less lately, less, feeling more facts. It was easier to quantify pain when it lived in lists instead of my chest. I flipped to a blank page and wrote Step 1, reclaim ownership. Step 2, stay quiet. Step 3, let them reveal themselves. That night, I slept well. 2 days later, I saw Olivia's engagement photos online. She'd tagged the location, Magnolia Harbor, of course, and captioned it, "A love story worth stealing hearts." Stealing. The word nearly made me laugh. Tara texted me the post with a single comment. "She's really tempting fate, huh?" I replied. "She's already met fate. She just hasn't recognized her yet." The next morning, I went to the venue under the pretense of finalizing my refund. The manager looked relieved to see me. "Miss Moore, I'm glad you came in. We've been so confused. Your sister's been making changes, but legally, we still report to you." "Keep it that way," I said. "Just let her think she's in control." He hesitated. Should I tell her that I smiled? No. Let her enjoy her illusion. It's all she really wants. As I walked out, I saw Olivia and Mom arriving from the parking lot, laughing, carrying fabric samples. Olivia spotted me and froze. "Well, this is awkward," she said. "Not really," I replied. "Just business." Mom stepped forward. "Rachel, what are you doing here, collecting what's mine?" I said. "Stop this," she said, lowering her voice. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." I looked at her and smiled faintly. Maybe discomfort is what truth feels like. Olivia rolled her eyes. "God, you're so dramatic. You can't stand that I'm happy, can you?" I studied her for a long second. "I just hope you enjoy it while it lasts." Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second before she forced another smile. "Oh, I will. You can't ruin this for me." "I don't have to," I said. I left before she could answer. That evening, Lucas texted me a short video and outtake from Olivia's shoot. She was standing under the oak tree, adjusting her veil, snapping at the crew. "Can we not use that angle? It makes me look bloated." God, Rachel always chose these unflattering setups. No wonder her clients looked miserable. Then she turned toward the camera, smirking. "She'll get over it. I mean, she's always been the shadow." I watched it twice, then 3 more times, until the ache in my chest cooled into something sharper. When Tara dropped by the next day, I showed her the clip. She whistled. "Wow, she really said that on camera. What are you gonna do with it?" "Keep it safe," I said. "Truth deserves good storage." Tara looked at me, her smile fading. "You're scaring me a little." "Don't be scared," I said. "Be patient." The following week, Olivia threw an engagement dinner, a rehearsal for her own perfection. Mom called again, trying one last time. "Come, sweetheart. Don't make this a thing. Be civil." I almost said no, but then I remembered how she'd clapped when Olivia made that joke. He chose right. Maybe it was time she saw the cracks up close. So I went. The restaurant was candlelit, polished, humming with shallow laughter. Olivia's friends surrounded her, all compliments and fake affection. When she saw me, she gasped dramatically. "Rachel, you came." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss your big night." She introduced me to her guests like an accessory. "This is my sister, the serious one." They laughed. I smiled. Dinner went on like a play with bad actors. Olivia toasted to new beginnings. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Mark grinned like he'd won a prize. Then someone asked, "So, Rachel, what do you do now that your plans changed?" I looked at Olivia. "I document stories," I said. "What kind of stories?" someone else asked. "The kind people pretend aren't true," I said. Until someone hits record. The table fell quiet. Olivia's smile twitched. Mom cleared her throat. "Rachel, maybe." "No, it's fine," I said lightly. "It's just work." The rest of the evening passed in silence that hummed like electricity. When I left, Tara texted me from across the room. "That smile you gave her, terrifying." 10/10. I walked out into the cool Charleston air, heels clicking on the cobblestone. The city lights shimmered on the water like tiny confessions. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "Let her have the fairy tale. Then, after a pause, I'll keep the footage." That night, Charleston slept under rain. He didn't. The city outside my window was washed in silver light, each drop on the glass stretching into thin rivers. I sat at my desk with the glow of my laptop burning across my face, scrolling through every contract I'd ever signed. Venue, catering, florist, photographer. Every document carried the same name, Rachel Moore. Mine, not hers. It wasn't anger that kept me awake anymore. It was precision. I wasn't imagining revenge, not yet. I was counting receipts, proof, ownership, the bones of the truth. When I found the original contract from Magnolia Harbor, my signature, my card, my non-transferable clause, I exhaled slowly. She hadn't even bothered to change the paperwork. "They built their castle on my foundation," I whispered. At 2 a.m., I opened my email and drafted a message to the florist. Just a test. A polite request to cancel the order and confirm refund status. I hit send and waited. 20 minutes later, I got the reply, confirmed. Full refund issued to Rachel Moore. My phone rang before I could close my laptop. Olivia's name flashed on the screen. "Did you just cancel the florist?" Her voice cracked through the speaker like static. I let silence stretch. "Did I? Don't mess with this, Rachel. They said you voided the entire order." "Maybe they read the contract," I said. She was breathing fast. "You think this is funny. You're acting insane." "No," I said quietly. "Just organized." Mom called 15 minutes later. "Rachel, stop this right now. She's hysterical." "Then tell her to calm down," I said. "I only canceled something that was still under my name." She's your sister. She's your daughter, I replied. Maybe try teaching her not to forge emails next time. Rachel, good night, Mom. I hung up before she could turn guilt into another sermon. The next morning the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, raw electric. Tara came over with coffee and that knowing grin. You look terrifyingly calm, she said, kicking off her shoes. I finally slept, I said. Oh boy, she murmured. That means someone else is about to have nightmares. We sat by the window watching the streetlights fade into morning. Tara stirred her drink and studied me. You're not going to confront her, are you? I shook my head. I've done confronting. It never works. They talk over me, twist my words. Silence scares people more. She smiled. Silence suits you. It's like you weaponized peace. Maybe peace was never meant to be gentle, I said. I spent the afternoon cleaning my studio, not out of stress but to think. Lucas came by to drop off memory cards and sat down quietly. She's been calling me, he said, begging me to send her raw footage, said she wants to review her angles. Did you? He laughed. No, I told her everything's stored under your name. She lost it. I looked up. Keep everything, Lucas. Every message, every clip. Don't delete a single file. He hesitated. Ratch, what are you doing? Just preserving reality. He leaned back, watching me closely. You're serious, completely. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of his hard drive spinning. Then he nodded. Okay. I'll back up everything. After he left, I opened my journal again. My handwriting had changed, sharper, steadier. I wrote, Rule 1, silence is not surrender. Rule 2, documentation is survival. Rule 3, exposure always finds light. At dusk, Mom showed up unannounced. The knock was soft but insistent. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. She stood in the doorway holding a plastic container of soup as if food could fix fractures. You look pale, she said. I'm fine. She stepped inside, her perfume flooding the room, expensive, suffocating. Olivia's in tears. You should see what this is doing to her. I imagine it's inconvenient, I said. Don't be cruel, Mom snapped. You're punishing her for a mistake. I looked her in the eye. You mean stealing my fiancé and my wedding? That's not fair. Love is complicated. So is fraud, I said. But one of them is easier to prove. Her lips trembled. Rachel, I didn't raise you to be vindictive. No, I said softly. You raised me to be quiet. I'm just adjusting the volume. She stared at me, speechless for once. I almost pitied her. Almost. When she left, she muttered, This isn't over. I closed the door and whispered to myself, No, it isn't. Later that night, I drove to the waterfront. The sky was bruised, blue clouds, low and heavy. I parked by Magnolia Harbor and walked down to the pier. The venue glowed across the water, warm lights, perfect symmetry, her dream in motion. My dream once. Rain began again, soft and steady. I stood there, hair damp, watching my reflection ripple in the black water. The surface distorted my face, splitting it into two, calm above, chaos below. For years I thought silence was weakness, but standing there soaked and steady, I realized it was control. Back home, I turned off every light except the desk lamp. The apartment glowed dimly, the world outside drowned in soundless thunder. I opened the email thread with Lucas and typed, Keep everything. I'll let you know when to use it. Before hitting send, I looked at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. My eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. They think I'm done, I murmured. They think I've moved on. A faint smile curved across my lips. Let them. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back, and listened to the soft hiss of rain against glass. Somewhere in that sound, I heard something familiar, like a storm holding its breath before lightning. And I thought maybe silence isn't waiting, maybe it's loading. The invitation came wrapped in gold foil, thick enough to hide its poison. Family dinner to celebrate Olivia's engagement, it read. I turned it over in my hands. The date at the bottom was June 12, my wedding date. Tara saw it on my counter and raised an eyebrow. "You're not going," she said flatly. "I am," I replied. "I want to see what my absence looks like." The restaurant was called High Garden, the kind of place that smelled like roses and money. Candles flickered across long tables draped in cream linen. When I walked in, I caught the faint echo of my own footsteps, like the building itself knew I didn't belong there anymore. Olivia saw me first. She was radiant in white, the kind of glow that only comes from taking something that was never yours. "Rach," she squealed, rising to hug me. "I'm so glad you came." "Family means everything, right?" I smiled, just enough to be polite. "That's what I've heard." Mom sat at the head of the table, raising a glass of wine. "We're just getting started, sweetheart. Sit next to Olivia." I slid into the empty chair right beside my sister. She smelled like lilies, my old bouquet choice. Dinner began with small talk and laughter that didn't sound real. Olivia told stories about the proposal, about Mark crying when he saw her ring. Her friends giggled like an audience. Every few sentences she'd glance at me, checking to see if I was watching. "I can't believe Magnolia Harbor was available," she said. "Guess fate really loves me." Mom chimed in, smiling proudly. "Olivia worked so hard for this. She deserves every bit of it." One of Mom's cousins squinted. "Didn't Rachel have that same venue reserved?" The table stilled. Mom's smile tightened. "Rachel changed her mind. She's practical like her father was." I took a sip of water and said nothing. Olivia's lips curved. "Oh, she's over it." "Right, Rach?" I looked at her, my tone even. "Sure, over it." Conversation picked up again awkwardly. The waiter poured more wine. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes but kept my face still. It wasn't anger anymore. It was theater, and I was finally learning my lines. Then Olivia stood, glass in hand. "I just want to say how lucky I am." Growing up, Rachel was always the serious one. Organized, focused, never fun. Laughter trickled around the table. I was the dreamer. And now look, my dream came true. She winked at me, a slow, deliberate motion. "Guess I just believed in fairy tales a little harder." Mom clapped. "To Olivia and Mark, may their fairy tale never end." The toast was met with cheers. I raised my glass, too, smiling faintly. "To fairy tales," I said softly. "They end one way or another." Her smile faltered. The conversation turned to vendors' dresses and family support. Someone asked Rachel, "Are you helping with the photography?" Before I could answer, Olivia laughed. "Oh no, she's taking a break from weddings. It's too emotional for her." The table erupted in light laughter. I set my glass down, my voice steady. "You're right. I'm more into reality these days. It's cleaner to capture." That shut everyone up. Olivia's cheeks flushed. Mom glared at me across the table, silently begging me not to ruin her picture-perfect night. So I smiled instead. "But congratulations. It's beautiful what you're doing, really. Turning someone else's plan into your own. That's talent." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Hey, let's just enjoy dinner, huh?" "Of course," I said. We wouldn't want to spoil the magic. The rest of the meal passed in silence, broken only by clinking glasses and forced laughter. Every now and then I caught Olivia glancing my way, searching for cracks in my calm. There were none. When dessert came, I pushed my plate away untouched. "Well, I said I should get going." Mom's hand shot out. "Stay a bit longer." "I've stayed long enough," I said. Then I stood, turning to Olivia. "Congratulations again." "I hope your fairy tale lasts longer than your filters." A few people gasped. Mom hissed Rachel, but I was already walking away. Outside, the night air felt sharp, alive. Rain had started again, gentle but steady. Tara was waiting in her car across the street, headlights cutting through the drizzle. She rolled down the window as I approached. "How bad was it?" she asked. I opened the passenger door. "Bad enough to deserve documentation." She laughed softly. "You didn't." "I did." I held up my phone. Audio recording. Every word. Tara shook her head. "You're terrifying." "Efficient," I corrected. We drove in silence for a few blocks. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the streets into rivers of gold. I stared out the window, thinking about the way Olivia's voice had trembled for the first time when I didn't react. She wanted a scene, I said. I gave her silence instead. Tara smirked. And nothing terrifies narcissists more. When I got home, I backed up the recording immediately. The file name appeared on my desktop: Dinner, Truth, Wave. I sat there staring at it, my reflection faint on the screen. For a long time, I didn't move. On the table beside me was a framed photo from years ago, Olivia and me as kids, both in pillowcase dresses, pretending to be brides. She had a crown of paper flowers. I had a plastic camera. Funny how we both got what we wanted. I turned the frame face down and whispered, "Fairy tales fade. But footage lasts forever." Lightning flashed outside, brief and white. The thunder that followed sounded like applause. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not because I'd won, but because the silence finally belonged to me. 2 days after the dinner, I woke to 32 missed calls. Mom, Olivia, even Mark. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment before turning it face down and making coffee. The silence that followed was almost sweet. By noon, Mom showed up uninvited again. I heard her knock, sharp and urgent like a debt collector's. I didn't move at first, just sipped my drink, watching the steam fade. Then she called out, "Rachel, I know you're in there." I opened the door slowly. Her lipstick was perfect, but her composure was cracking. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Define do," I said. She stepped inside, clutching her purse like it contained her patience. "The venue called this morning. They said the reservation's invalid. They're confused about the name on the contract." I raised an eyebrow. "Are they? That's odd. I'd think my name would be easy enough to read." Her jaw tightened. "Rachel, this has gone far enough." "Then stop talking about it," I said, walking back to the kitchen. She followed, her heels stabbing the hardwood. "You're sabotaging your sister's happiness because of some grudge." "Some grudge?" I turned to her. "She stole my wedding, my venue, my date, my deposits. What exactly do you think I should have done? Sent her a fruit basket?" "She didn't mean it that way," Mom said quickly. "She just acted fast. And you let your emotions get the better of you." I laughed, short and sharp. "You know what's funny? You all keep saying she didn't mean it, but no one ever says she shouldn't have done it." "She's family," she whispered. "So am I." Her silence stretched long enough for me to hear the clock ticking behind her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Your father and I are embarrassed. Everyone is talking." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll finally see the family you built." She stared at me for a beat too long, then turned toward the door. "You've always had a way of ruining things," she said. "Even your own peace." I smiled faintly. "Peace isn't supposed to be comfortable, Mom. Just quiet." When she left, the apartment felt lighter, almost hollow. I sat on the couch, replaying her words in my mind until they lost their sting. Then I grabbed my laptop. It was time to move. Lucas arrived an hour later, shoulders damp from the rain. "You said it was urgent." "It is." I turned the screen toward him. "I want to put together a highlight reel from Olivia's wedding shoot." He blinked. "Already, yes. But not the wedding, the prep sessions, the interviews. All the behind-the-scenes stuff." He frowned. "Rachel, that footage is technically hers." I smiled. "Legally, it's mine. Contracts under my company. She never transferred rights." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. What kind of highlight reel are we talking about?" "The honest kind," I said. For the next hour, we scrolled through files. Olivia laughing too loud, bossing stylists around, rolling her eyes when Mom talked. Little moments she'd never imagine anyone saving. Then I found the clip from her makeup test where she'd bragged to the crew. I told Rachel I'd help her plan, but honestly, she needed direction. She has taste like a tax form. The stylist laughed, and Olivia smirked into the mirror. "It's okay. I'll make it look better than she ever could. She'll thank me when she sees what a real wedding looks like." Lucas froze mid-scroll. "Jesus," I watched quietly. "Keep it." He turned to me. "You're not gonna post this, are you?" "No," I said. "Posting is noise. This needs silence. Impact." He studied me for a long moment. "You've got a plan." "Not yet," I said, "but I will." When he left, I sat back listening to the rain tap against the windows. Each drop felt like punctuation. The air was thick with the kind of tension that comes right before truth finds its voice. Tara called that evening. "Your mom just posted something weird on Facebook," she said. "A photo of you and Olivia as kids with the caption, 'Sisters always find their way back to each other.'" I laughed. "Ah yes, emotional PR. Classic Margaret move." "She's trying to control the narrative," Tara said. "She always does." I paused. "Let her. She'll write the story and I'll screen the footage." "Rachel, what are you planning, Justice?" I said softly. "But make it cinematic." That night, I started organizing the files. I cut clips, adjusted sound, layered quiet moments with her crueler lines. No narration, just her words, her laughter, her reflection in the mirror. At some point, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, control felt gentle, like gravity. The next morning, I went for a walk by the harbor. The city was waking up, vendors setting up stands, seagulls circling sunlight breaking through wet clouds. Across the water, I could see Magnolia Harbor's grand balcony glinting in the distance. Soon it would host her rehearsal dinner. I pulled out my phone and opened a new folder. I named it The Fairy Tale Project. Later that afternoon, Lucas texted me a preview link of the rough cut. My pulse quickened as I hit play. The video opened with her voice laughing. "It's just a building. Rachel's too sentimental." Then a fade to black followed by the image of her twirling in front of the mirror saying, "If she couldn't handle planning, she doesn't deserve the dream." It was less than 3 minutes long, but it hit like thunder. Every frame was truth stripped bare, Lucas called. "You sure you want to keep this?" "Yes." "And when exactly are you planning to use it?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "When the audience is seated." He was quiet for a moment. "You're serious?" "As a contract clause," I said. That evening, I met Tara for drinks. She studied my face over the rim of her glass. "You look like someone who finally stopped caring what people think." "I did," I said. "Turns out, peace comes after you stop performing," she exhaled. "I've never seen you like this. Calm, scary calm." I stirred my drink. "Calm isn't the opposite of chaos, Tara. It's the sound it makes when it's done pretending." We drank in silence after that. The bar lights shimmered across her eyes, and for a second I saw pity there. I didn't want it. When I got home, I replayed the video one last time before saving it to an external drive. Then I locked the drive in my desk drawer. "Patience," I whispered. "Timing is everything." Outside, thunder rumbled again, rolling low over the harbor. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the rain gather strength. And in that sound, between the drops, between the breaths, I felt it. The story was no longer hers. It was mine. The rehearsal dinner was set for Friday night, and Charleston glowed like it knew something terrible was about to happen. I spent the morning in my studio reviewing the footage one last time. Every frame was sharp, every word perfectly audible. Her laughter, her arrogance, her little digs that once sliced quietly beneath my skin, they were all there waiting for their debut. Tara stopped by around noon carrying croissants and anxiety. "Tell me you're not actually doing this," she said before she'd even sat down. I didn't look up from the screen. "I'm not doing anything. The truth is," she sighed. "Rachel, this could destroy your whole family." I met her eyes. "Then maybe they shouldn't have built it on lies." She leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "You know most people would just move on." I said. "Turns out forgiveness only works when both sides admit there's something to forgive." The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the hard drive. Tara finally said, "You're scaring me a little. I'm past the part where that matters." Around 4 p.m., I got a text from Lucas. "All set. They approved my AV setup for the ceremony tomorrow. You'll have full access." "Perfect." I sent a short reply, "Bring the drive. Tomorrow the story tells itself." By the time dusk fell, the air felt electric heavy with that kind of stillness that comes before a storm breaks. I drove by Magnolia Harbor not to go inside, just to see it one last time before everything shifted. The ballroom lights were glowing through the windows, soft and golden. Through the glass, I could see Olivia in a silk robe, posing for photos, champagne in hand. Mom stood beside her, smiling like nothing was wrong. They looked radiant, untouchable. I parked across the street and watched for a long minute. Then, quietly, I whispered, "Enjoy the rehearsal." That night, I barely slept. I wasn't nervous. It was something colder, controlled, like waiting for a clock to strike a specific second. The morning came gray and still, the kind of sky that held its breath. I showered, dressed simply in black, and tied my hair back. The air outside smelled like wet stone. Tara texted me, "You sure you want to go? I need to see it," and I replied. By noon, I arrived at the hotel. Guests were already buzzing around the lobby, bridesmaids in pastel dresses, groomsmen joking, photographers clicking away. None of them looked at me twice. I was invisible again, and somehow that felt right. Lucas found me near the service entrance, a lanyard hanging from his neck. "You really came," he said. I said I would. He hesitated, his eyes scanning my face. "You look calm." "I am," I said. "For once." He nodded slowly. "Everything's ready. The AV guy thinks the drive's just for a slideshow." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way." The ceremony was scheduled for 2. I took a seat near the back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a column. The place looked exactly how I'd planned it months ago. The floral arches, the candles, the gold-rimmed glasses. My blueprint, my fingerprints. When the music started, everyone rose. Olivia appeared in her gown, white lace glittering under the chandeliers. She looked breathtaking, I'll admit that. Like a woman who believed she'd won. Mom followed close behind her, beaming proud. When she saw me in the crowd, her smile faltered. I just nodded once. The ceremony began smoothly. The officiant spoke about love and family and destiny, all the words people use when they're trying to disguise selfishness as fate. Then came the moment for the slideshow, the one Olivia had requested to celebrate their love story. Lucas stood by the control booth, hands steady on the laptop. The projector flickered to life. The first few images were predictable childhood photos, their engagement shots, the happy couple laughing. The audience cooed, clapped softly. Then, mid-laugh, the screen froze. A new clip appeared, shaky at first, then clear. Olivia's voice crisped through the speakers, Rachel's too sentimental. "It's just a building. I'll make it look better than she ever could." Gasps rippled through the room. The next cut showed her again in the mirror, smirking. "She'll thank me when she sees what a real wedding looks like." Someone near the front whispered, "What is this?" Mom turned in her seat, pale. Olivia froze at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Another clip played, her mocking laugh from the makeup test. "She's always been the shadow. I'm the one people notice." The room erupted in murmurs. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Mark looked at her, confused, then furious. "Turn it off!" Olivia screamed, her voice cracking. But the screen kept rolling, her voice again, this time quieter, meaner. "She's pathetic, really. Always trying to be perfect, and still ending up alone." The clip cut to black. Silence. Then, a low hum as the final image appeared. Text simple and white against the dark. "Every fairy tale has a cost." The lights flickered back on. No one moved. Olivia's face was ashen, her lips trembling. "Who did this?" she whispered. I stood slowly. Every eye turned toward me. Her voice rose shrill. You ruined my wedding." I met her gaze. "You ruined mine first." She stumbled forward. "You're insane." "No," I said quietly. "Just thorough." Mom rushed to her side, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. "Rachel, how could you?" "How could I said. "That's rich coming from the woman who applauded theft." "Leave, Mom," said her voice shaking. "You're not welcome here." I smiled faintly. I never was. Then I walked out slow and calm, the sound of chaos following me down the hall, voices, cries, the thud of heels on marble. Outside, the air hit cool against my skin. I breathed in deeply, the first real breath I'd taken in months. Lucas caught up to me a few minutes later, out of breath. "You didn't stay to watch the end. I saw enough," I said. He hesitated. "They're freaking out in there. I'm sure they are." He studied me. "Do you feel better?" I thought about it. "No, but I feel balanced." Tara called as I reached my car. "Rachel, it's all over social media already. Someone recorded the whole thing." "Of course they did," I said softly. "Stories spread faster when they're true." "Your mom's going to lose it." "She already did," I said, starting the engine. As I drove away, thunder rolled in the distance. The sky had begun to split open, rain falling in streaks that blurred the windshield. I didn't turn on the wipers right away. I liked the way the water distorted everything, the streetlights, the hotel, the past. Somewhere behind me, the fairy tale was collapsing, and for the first time I didn't look back. The storm didn't stop that night. It howled against my windows, shaking them like something was trying to get in. I sat on the floor with a blanket wrapped around me, my phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages, some from numbers I didn't know, some from old friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. And then finally one from Mom. "Mom, what have you done, Mom? Do you even realize what you've caused, Mom? Your sister's gone." She left the venue in tears. "The wedding's off." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because for the first time there was nothing left to explain. Around midnight there was a knock at my door. Not the angry kind, this one was slow, almost hesitant. I got up, heart thudding softly, and opened it to find Lucas standing there, drenched from the rain. "She kicked everyone out," he said quietly. "Even her fiancé." The guy looked humiliated. Cameras caught everything. I stepped aside, letting him in. "You shouldn't be here." He set his bag down. "I figured you'd say that, but you shouldn't be alone either." I looked at him for a long second before walking back to the couch. "Alone's all I've been." He sat across from me, rubbing his hands together to warm them. I didn't expect it to go down like that. I thought maybe, I don't know, she'd laugh it off, spin it somehow. "She can't spin the truth," I said. "Not this time." He watched me quietly. "You don't look happy." "I'm not," I admitted. "I'm just finished." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain battering the windows. It sounded like applause fading into static. Finally, Lucas spoke again. "Do you want me to delete the footage?" I shook my head. "No, keep it. Not for revenge, just for record. People forget fast." "I want proof that I wasn't crazy." He nodded slowly. "You weren't." When he left, I didn't sleep. I stayed up staring at the faint glow of the city lights outside, wondering what Olivia was doing right then. Crying, blaming me, pretending, maybe all three? The next morning, Mom showed up again. No knock this time, just the sound of my door opening. She stood there looking exhausted, her mascara smudged under her eyes. "You destroyed her," she said flatly. "She destroyed herself," I said. She was humiliated in front of everyone. The media picked it up. There are clips everywhere. "She wanted attention," I replied. "Now she has it." Mom's voice cracked. "You've turned this family into a circus. Are you proud of yourself?" I stared at her. "Pride has nothing to do with it." I told the truth. She took a shaky breath. "You think you've won something, don't you?" I laughed softly. "Winning implies there was a game. This was just consequences." Mom's face twisted like she wanted to slap me but couldn't find the strength. "I hope one day you realize what you've done. You've lost your sister forever." "She was gone long before the video," I said quietly. Mom turned toward the door, then stopped. "You always wanted control. Now you have it. I hope it keeps you warm." When she left, the silence in the apartment was heavy, thick, but not unbearable. It was the kind of silence that follows after a storm, when the air is clean but nothing feels the same. Later that day, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Olivia, was it worth it?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Emmy, no," but it was necessary. The typing dots appeared, then vanished. No reply came after that. By evening, the story had spread across Charleston like wildfire. Local blogs, social media pages, wedding gossip groups, all of them had clips, photos, speculations. Bride exposed during ceremony, one headline read, "Sister's secret footage reveals betrayal." Tara called me whispering, even though she was alone. "You're trending." Not by name, but people are connecting the dots. "You okay? Being infamous isn't the worst thing that's happened to me," I said. She sighed. "You sure you don't regret it?" "Regrets for people who doubt their choices. I don't." That wasn't entirely true. That night I replayed everything in my head, the planning, the silence, the looks on their faces. It wasn't joy that lingered. It was exhaustion. Revenge didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival dressed in sharper clothes. A few days later, I got an email from Magnolia Harbor. The subject line read "Unused balance refund." Inside the message was short and clinical. "Dear Miss Moore, as the original contract holder, you are entitled to a full refund of $14,700. Funds will be issued within 5 business days." I stared at the number for a long time. $14,700, a refund on a wedding that never happened twice. I forwarded the email to Tara with a single line, "Guess the universe has a sense of humor." She replied, "Or a good accountant." I didn't touch the money. I just let it sit there, proof that something once belonged to me and had found its way back. A week passed. The storm cleared literally and figuratively. Charleston went back to pretending as cities do. People moved on to the next scandal. My inbox quieted. My phone stopped buzzing, until one night around sunset I got another text. "Olivia, I saw the clip again. I can't walk into a store without someone recognizing me. You ruined my life." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed slowly, "M.E. You ruined your own." I just turned on the lights. This time she replied almost instantly, "Olivia, you think the truth makes you better than me. M.E. No, it just makes me free." After that, the conversation ended for good. The next morning I took a long walk by the harbor. The air was crisp, the sky impossibly blue, like nothing bad had ever happened here. I watched boats drift by, people laughing, children feeding gulls, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of it all. Lucas called me later asking if I wanted the hard drive back. I told him to keep it. "Maybe one day someone will need a reminder of what honesty costs," he chuckled softly. "You're something else, Rachel." "I'm just done pretending," I said. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the last traces of daylight fade into the horizon. The water reflected gold and silver like a new beginning, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the fatigue and the ache, a quiet truth settled, one that wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about release. For the first time since that ring, that venue, that betrayal, I finally felt light. And as the city fell silent, I whispered to the dark, fairy tales are fragile things. But truth doesn't break. The week after the wedding disaster felt like a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes after an explosion when the smoke is still hanging in the air, but everything has already burned. People around town stopped pretending they didn't recognize me. At the coffee shop, at the market, at the gas station, there were glances, whispers, the occasional brave soul asking, "Are you that sister?" I always smiled politely and said, "Which one?" By then, the video had gone viral beyond Charleston. National wedding blogs picked it up. Reddit threads, TikTok edits, endless commentary. Bride exposed for mocking her sister, karma strikes live at the altar. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them mattered. Tara came over one night with takeout and a grim smile. "You've become folklore," she said, handing me a box of noodles. "I didn't ask for fame," I said. "No one does. But the internet decides who's the villain and who's the saint. Lucky for you, you're trending as the quiet avenger." I laughed softly. "Quiet's relative." She sat down next to me, scrolling through her phone. You know people are calling the clip poetic justice. Someone even started a thread titled Sisterhood and Betrayal, the Rachel Moore story. Catchy, I said dryly. She gave me a sideways glance. How are you actually doing functional? That's not an emotion. It's the only one I trust, I said. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the cicadas hummed loud in the summer air. Tara finally said, "You could do something with this, you know. Write about it. Tell your side before someone else does." "I don't need to," I said. The footage already told the truth. "Yeah, but people will twist it. They always do." I leaned back in my chair. Let them. "I'm done performing for the court of public opinion." She studied me. "You say that, but you still check your phone every hour." I smiled faintly, only to make sure silence still holds. The next morning, I woke to an email from Magnolia Harbor's event coordinator. It wasn't business, it was personal. "Hi Rachel, I wanted to thank you for how you handled everything. I've worked in this industry 15 years and never seen someone keep their dignity under so much pressure. The staff all said the same thing, your calm was scarier than any outburst. If you ever want to host something again, your name will always open our doors." I read it twice before closing my laptop. Compliments weren't comfort, they were closure. That day, I decided to visit Dad's grave. It had been months since I'd gone. The cemetery sat on a hill just outside the city where the air always smelled faintly of pine. I brought a small bouquet, simple lilies, his favorite, and knelt down in the grass. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. "You'd hate how loud everything's been lately." The breeze shifted gently through the trees. I smiled. I finally stopped being the quiet one. "You'd probably call it unladylike." A tear slid down my cheek before I realized it was there. "You always said family was supposed to be a circle, not a chain. Turns out ours was more like a noose." I placed the flowers down, brushing dirt off my hands. "I didn't want revenge, you know. I just wanted someone to admit I mattered." The wind picked up, rustling the grass. It sounded like an answer, soft and invisible. That night, I came home to find a letter slipped under my door. No return address. The handwriting was messy but familiar. I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded it slowly. "Rachel, you ruined everything. My reputation, my engagement, my friends. I can't go anywhere without people pointing at me. You made me into a monster. But maybe I was one. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I understand now why you did it. I took what was yours and pretended it was mine. I thought I deserved more, but all I really wanted was to be seen. You always were the one who mattered, and I hated you for it. Don't expect an apology. I'm not there yet. But I hope one day neither of us feels like the shadow anymore." Olivia, I read it 3 times, each line cutting differently. There was no peace in her words, just honesty. And maybe that was enough. Tara came by later, saw the letter, and frowned. "So she's alive and semi-self-aware. That's progress." "She's still angry," I said. "Of course she is. You showed her the mirror." I traced my finger along Olivia's signature. "Do you think she'll ever forgive me?" Tara shrugged. "Maybe. But that's not really the point anymore, is it?" No, it wasn't. That weekend I packed a small suitcase and drove out of town. No destination, just distance. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, long ribbons of gray cutting through the green. I rolled down the window and let the wind whip through my hair. It smelled like rain and salt and freedom. I stopped by the coast that evening, parking near a quiet stretch of beach. The sand was cold beneath my bare feet, the tide gentle and low. I stood there watching the horizon bleed from gold to violet. There was no soundtrack, no cinematic closure. Just the sound of the ocean breathing a slow, patient rhythm that made my heart match its pace. I took my phone out and scrolled to Olivia's number. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed, "Emmy, I got your letter. Thank you." I didn't expect a reply and none came. But I didn't delete the message either. Instead, I walked along the water's edge until the stars appeared. The waves kept touching my feet, washing away the prints behind me as if the past itself refused to stay still. Somewhere between the tide and the moonlight, I realized revenge hadn't freed me, truth had. And maybe that was enough. When I got back to the car, my reflection in the window looked different. Softer, maybe. Or just tired. I smiled at it anyway. "Goodbye, fairy tale," I whispered. "Hello, reality." The drive home was quiet, almost peaceful. The city lights grew brighter as I got closer, and for once they didn't feel harsh, they felt alive. When I reached my apartment, the rain started again, gentle this time, tapping against the glass like an old friend. I curled up on the couch watching it fall and thought about all the noise, all the chaos, all the silence that had followed. And in that quiet, I finally understood something my father used to say: truth isn't revenge, it's release. So I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the storm outside sing me to sleep. It had been 3 months since the wedding that never happened, and Charleston had already found new gossip to chew on. The city forgets fast, maybe because it needs to. But I didn't. I'd moved through those weeks like someone learning how to breathe again, slow, deliberate, careful not to look backward. People stopped whispering when I walked into coffee shops. The story had cooled, fading into digital folklore, another viral scandal swallowed by the internet. Sometimes strangers still gave me that look, the one that said, "I know you from somewhere," but I didn't flinch anymore. Recognition didn't sting when you own the story. Mom hadn't spoken to me since that day. The silence between us felt like another inheritance, cold, heavy, impossible to sell. I didn't reach out either. Some bonds didn't need mending, they needed burial. But one afternoon in early September, I got a voicemail. Her voice, small and tired, cracked through the speaker. "Rachel, your sister's not well. She's been staying with me for a few weeks. Maybe it's time you two talked." I replayed it twice just to be sure I'd heard right. Olivia back under Mom's roof. The same house where she'd once mocked me over dinner, where she'd shown off her stolen ring and my stolen plans. I didn't call back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either. The next morning, I drove past Mom's neighborhood slowly, without meaning to. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint on the porch beginning to fade. Through the front window, I saw her, Olivia, sitting at the kitchen table in pajamas, hair unbrushed, staring into a cup of coffee like it contained the meaning of her life. She looked nothing like the girl from the video. I parked down the street and sat there for a long minute, debating whether to go in. Then I saw Mom open the door and glance toward the road as if she knew I'd come. I didn't even know if I wanted forgiveness or to offer it. Maybe both, maybe neither. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and regret. Olivia didn't look up right away. Mom smiled weakly. "You came." I didn't say I wouldn't. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Finally, Olivia whispered, "You look different." "So do you," I said. She laughed softly, but it wasn't real. "I guess humiliation's a great diet." I sat down across from her. "You look tired." "I am." She stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on the spoon. "Everywhere I go, people stare. Every time I open my phone, there's another comment, another meme. I thought it would die down, but it doesn't." I watched her hands shake. "It will. Everything fades eventually." She looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "Does it? Or do people like us just get better at pretending?" The silence that followed wasn't heavy. This time it was fragile like glass. Mom cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two alone." She disappeared into the other room, the sound of her slippers fading down the hall. Olivia took a deep breath. "I don't even know where to start." "Maybe start with the truth," I said. Her mouth twisted. "The truth is, I hated how easy things came to you. How people trusted you. How you were always calm even when everything went wrong. I thought if I took what was yours, I could finally feel like you." "And did you?" She shook her head. "No. I just ended up proving I wasn't you. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just pity. Not the soft kind, the kind that comes after watching someone burn their own house down and finally realize there's no one left to blame. "I didn't want to destroy you," I said quietly, "but I wasn't going to keep letting you destroy me either." She nodded slowly. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it out loud. I leaned back, studying her face. What are you going to do now? I don't know. I deleted my social media. I'm looking for work somewhere. No one recognizes me. Maybe start over. That's a good place to begin, I said. She smiled faintly. You sound like Dad. The mention of him caught me off guard. He would have hated all of this. Yeah, she said. He always said truth wasn't about proving who's right, it's about cleaning what's rotten before it spreads. For a second, the ache in my chest softened. He also said family doesn't always mean forever. Olivia looked down. Guess we learned that the hard way. We sat there in quiet for a while, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me. But as I reached the door, she said softly, "Thank you." I turned. For what? For ending it. I never would have had the courage. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and walked out. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, spilling across the street like forgiveness. I wasn't sure I deserved. I drove home with the windows down, the wind tangling my hair, the air carrying that first hint of autumn. For the first time in months, the city didn't feel like a cage. That night, I sat by my window with my journal, the same one where I'd written plans, steps, rules. I flipped to the last page, the one still blank, and wrote, Step 12, let go. The words looked strange on paper, like they belonged to someone braver than me, but they stayed there solid and quiet. Later, Tara called. You disappeared all day. Please tell me you didn't burn another wedding venue? Not this time, I said, smiling. You sound lighter. I think I am. She hesitated. So what now? What comes after revenge? Maybe peace, I said. Maybe nothing. Nothing sounds boring. After what we've lived through, I said softly, boring sounds perfect. After we hung up, I closed. My laptop turned off every light and just listened. Outside, the night hummed with life crickets, distant laughter, the low rush of traffic. All of it felt like a world that had kept moving even when I'd stopped. For the first time, I didn't feel behind. I walked over to the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd started this story. Her eyes weren't angry anymore, they were clear, almost soft. I thought of Olivia, of Dad, of Mom's shaking voice, and of all the noise that had finally gone quiet. And I whispered to my reflection, You did what you had to do. The reflection didn't argue. When I finally went to bed, the air through the open window was cool and still. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, but softer now, like an echo of a storm long past. I closed my eyes, pulled the blanket close, and smiled into the dark. For once, silence didn't mean war. It meant peace. Autumn came quietly that year, like the city was trying not to wake a sleeping memory. Charleston's air grew cooler, the days shorter, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found comfort in ordinary things. Morning walks, fresh coffee, the sound of rain against the balcony. Life wasn't loud anymore, and that was its own kind of healing. One Thursday afternoon, I stopped by the local library to drop off a photography book I'd borrowed months ago and never read. The librarian, a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes, smiled when she saw me. You're Rachel Moore, aren't you? I froze for a moment before nodding. I am. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I saw what happened on the internet. I just wanted to say good for you. Some people need to be humbled. I didn't know whether to thank her or apologize, so I just smiled politely and said life has a way of doing that on its own. As I walked out, the autumn wind brushed through the trees, scattering orange leaves across the pavement. I realized something then. People would always know me as that sister, and maybe that was okay. Because that story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming myself from a family that had taught me silence was love. That night I met Tara at a small jazz bar downtown. The place was dim, the kind of warm golden light that made everyone look a little softer. She slid a glass of wine across the table. You look alive, she said. I feel it, I said. Your sister reached out to me, she said carefully. She's working at a florist now. Keeps her head down. I think she's trying. I stared at the candle flickering between us. Good for her. She asked about you. I raised an eyebrow. Really, yeah. Wanted to know if you're still angry. I laughed quietly. Anger's heavy. I dropped it somewhere along the way. Tara nodded. You've changed, Rach. I had to, I said. You can't carry truth and bitterness at the same time. They don't fit. The music drifted between us, a slow trumpet tune that filled the quiet. For once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. A week later, Lucas called. I hadn't heard from him in months. Got a minute? He asked. Always, I said. I'm moving to Portland. Got a job offer from a studio up there. But before I go, there's something you should have. He showed up that afternoon holding a small hard drive. Backup of the footage, he said. The original. Thought you might want to decide what to do with it. I stared at it for a moment before shaking my head. Delete it. He blinked. Are you sure? Yeah, it's done. I don't need proof anymore. He smiled slowly. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were fragile. Turns out you were just loading. I laughed. That's one way to put it. When he left, I plugged in the drive one last time, opened the folder, and scrolled through the files. The clips loaded like ghosts, frozen moments of betrayal and arrogance. I hovered my mouse over the folder, took a deep breath, and hit delete. The screen blinked. Then the files were gone. The silence that followed was clean. That night, I dreamed of my father again. He was sitting on the porch the way he used to, watching the sunset, with a glass of iced tea in his hand. I sat beside him and he said, You stopped fighting fire with fire. I smiled in the dream. I just stopped standing in the flames. When I woke up, the morning light spilled across my bed, soft and golden. I made coffee, opened the windows, and let the cool air in. The city smelled like rain and renewal. Around noon, I got a text from Olivia. Olivia, Mom's birthday dinner next week. She wants us both there. I'll understand if you say no. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, I'll come. It's time. When the night arrived, I wore a simple black dress and brought a small bouquet of lilies. Mom's house looked the same, though the tension in the air was different, softer somehow. Olivia opened the door. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes didn't carry that sharpness anymore. Hey, she said. Hey. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before she stepped aside. Come in. Mom was in the kitchen setting the table. When she saw me, she froze, her eyes wide. Then she smiled, small and genuine. You came. I did. Dinner was quiet at first. No one mentioned the past, and I didn't force it. We talked about work, the weather, the neighborhood, the kind of small things that keep the peace. Then halfway through dessert, Mom looked at both of us and said softly, I know I wasn't fair to either of you. Olivia and I exchanged glances, surprised. Mom's voice trembled. I thought I was keeping the family together, but I was really just choosing sides. I'm sorry for that. It was the first time she'd ever apologized for anything. I didn't know what to do with it except accept it. Thank you, I said quietly. Olivia nodded too. Yeah, thanks, Mom. We ate the rest of the meal in something close to peace. It wasn't perfect, it was fragile, tentative, but it was real. After dinner, Olivia walked me to my car. The night air was cool, the moon hanging low over the street. You really deleted it? She asked suddenly. I did, I said. She nodded slowly. Thank you. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for me, I know. She smiled faintly. Still thank you. We stood there for a moment, the quiet between us, no longer sharp but calm. When I got in the car, she leaned down and said, You were right, you know, about what fairy tales always have a cost. I smiled. Yeah, but so does freedom. She stepped back, hands in her pockets, and whispered, Be free, Rachel. I drove off, the headlights cutting through the dark, the wind brushing across my face, like something lighter than forgiveness, something closer to peace. When I got home, I sat by the window watching the lights shimmer on the harbor. The city was quiet again. My life was quiet again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just here, present, alive, unburdened. I took a deep breath and whispered into the still night, the story's over. And the silence that answered felt like an ending that had finally learned how to rest. Winter came to Charleston slow and quiet, softening the edges of everything it touched. The harbor fog rolled in early in the mornings, wrapping the streets in silver haze, and I found myself waking up before sunrise, more often making coffee sitting by the window and watching the light grow. It had been nearly a year since the day my sister's wedding ended in smoke and silence, and yet it felt like another lifetime. The noise had faded, the gossip had moved on, and what was left behind was something I didn't expect: stillness. Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that makes room for breathing again. I'd taken on more photography work by then. Quiet jobs, small weddings, portraits of people who didn't care about perfection, just honesty. One afternoon, while editing photos in my studio, I caught myself smiling at a shot of an older couple holding hands under the rain. The woman's mascara had run, the man's tie was crooked, and somehow it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever captured. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, beauty isn't in the fairy tale. It's in the cracks that let the light through. A week before Christmas, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just my name written in looping handwriting. Inside was a single photograph: Olivia standing in front of a small flower shop with a sign that read "New Roots." She was smiling genuinely this time, her hair pulled back and her hands stained with soil. On the back she'd written, "Starting over. Thank you for forcing me to." I stared at it for a long moment, then pinned it to my bulletin board beside my own photos. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had destroyed my wedding, and now she was building beauty from the ground up. Maybe that was her way of saying sorry. Maybe it was mine too for holding on so long. A few days later, I decided to visit Mom for the holidays. She greeted me at the door with that same soft, awkward smile she'd worn since the dinner. The air smelled like cinnamon and old photographs. "I made your favorite," she said. "Apple pie. I even followed the recipe this time." We ate in the living room, the tree glowing quietly beside us. She asked about work, about my friends, about whether I'd ever thought of leaving Charleston. I told her maybe someday. She nodded slowly, as if she understood that the world beyond this city was something I finally believed I deserved. At one point she looked up and said, "Your father would be proud of you, you know." I swallowed hard. He always wanted us to find peace. "And you did," she said. "Even if you had to burn a few bridges to do it." We both laughed, the sound light and strange in the quiet house. Later that night, when she'd gone to bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold and sharp, the stars hanging clear above the harbor. I closed my eyes and listened the wind through the trees, the faint echo of the tide, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. For a moment I thought about everything that had led here. The stolen date, the stolen venue, the betrayal that once felt unbearable. And then I realized something simple: revenge had never been the ending. It was just the door I had to walk through to find myself again. A week later, on New Year's Eve, Tara and I met at the waterfront bar we used to haunt before everything changed. The place was packed with laughter and champagne lights twinkling like promises. She raised her glass. "To a year of chaos." I clinked mine against hers. "And to surviving it." She grinned. "You didn't just survive, Rach. You rewrote the ending." I smiled. "No, I just stopped living in someone else's version of it." We stayed until midnight watching fireworks bloom over the harbor. The reflections danced across the water, bright and fleeting. I thought of all the things that had burned: plans, lies, illusions, and how somehow the ashes had turned into something cleaner. When the countdown began, Tara shouted over the noise. "So, what's your resolution this year?" I thought for a moment before answering. "To live quietly, but not silently." She laughed. "That's very you." After midnight, I walked home through the cool air, the sound of fireworks fading behind me. When I reached my apartment, I poured myself one last glass of wine and sat by the window again, just like I had so many times before. The city shimmered below, alive and breathing. I opened my journal to the last page, where I had written months ago, Step 12, let go. Underneath it, I added one final line, Step 13, begin. I closed the book and looked at the reflection in the glass. I didn't look like a woman haunted anymore. I looked like someone who had learned how to stop chasing closure and start choosing peace. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, golden and calm. I packed my camera, drove to the coast, and spent the day taking pictures of strangers' families, walking dogs, kids building castles, an old man reading alone by the water. Every click of the shutter felt like a new beginning. Around sunset, I turned the camera on myself for the first time in years. The photo wasn't perfect, wind and my hair light too bright, but it was honest, and that was enough. As I stood there watching the waves roll in, I whispered into the wind, "It's over." The tide came in and kissed the shore, then pulled back quietly, carrying the past with it. I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the sound of the ocean swallow the last of the noise. If anyone had told me that peace would feel this gentle, I wouldn't have believed them. But maybe that's the thing about truth, it doesn't arrive with thunder. It settles softly like the tide after a storm. And somewhere between the waves and the wind, I finally understood what my story had always been about. Not revenge, not betrayal. It was about the moment you stop surviving your past and start living your own beginning. So I lifted the camera one last time, aimed it at the horizon, and pressed the shutter. The frame filled with light. And for once, I didn't need anything else. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after being broken, tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true tales of revenge, redemption, and renewal. Because sometimes the ending isn't justice, it's peace.